Andy just feels like the obvious winner pick. But again, it feels too obvious, which is what makes it scary. Because I just don't know is the winner going to be this. It feels like the most obvious winner of the new era. Like it feels like I can't think of a more obvious winner since Russell and Samoa.
And he didn't even win.
That's what I'm saying. Like it was like someone who was guaranteed to win and then didn't. So that's sort of what this feels like. Someone is just driving the season. He is the winner of the season. He's going the whole way. He is the whole season. Everyone thinks he's going to win. And then at the end, he doesn't win.
He's been the main character of literally every single episode.
Welcome to the Idle Talk podcast. My name's Peyton. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host and friend, Jacob. This week, we are talking about Survivor 47, episode 10, Loyal to the Soil. If you haven't seen this episode, this is your spoiler warning. Consider yourself warned. We're going to get right into it because we're nearing the end of the season. It is very close. I had to double check as I was saying what episode number it was because it seems crazy to think that this is episode 10. And we were just told that there's going to be a 2-part finale this season. How do you think that changes our expectations moving forward over these last, I think, potentially 4 episodes of the season, Jacob?
I don't know if it necessarily changes my expectations for the season. It almost just makes me question where we are as a Survivor community and where Jeff's head is at with Survivor, because they're having this increased budget to make now full 90-minute episodes in an entire season, and also do 2-hour first 2 episodes and do 2-hour last episodes. In all honesty, I didn't really see a reason for the first 2 episodes to be 2 hours. They were entertaining, but there wasn't something that was happening that made me felt like the 2-hour runtime was warranted, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me get my hopes up that maybe something's coming, a new twist or something like that, but I don't want to get my hopes up because I don't think that's what's going to happen. I don't necessarily think that there's going to be something different. I honestly just think they're doing it because they want to, and maybe to get some more ad revenue and get some higher viewerships and stuff like that. My dream would be that there's some new twist that they need more time to explain and stuff like that, but that's just me being wishful thinking.
I think that you're right in, I think a very big part of it is revenue. I think that plays a significant role in the final decision as to why they're increasing episode lengths so much. It's generating them a whole new 30-minute ad spot for them to have an already captive audience that was already there for an hour, sticking around watching ads for another 30 minutes. And so now if you're doing a 2-part finale, you have people coming back an extra week to watch those ads. And so I think it really is probably a revenue play. But something that does make me sort of excited for the finale, and the reason why I brought up the question is I don't think that it is introducing a twist. I think that would be delightful, but I'm not getting my hopes up for that. I think that it opens the door for us to be a little bit more surprised with the outcome. Because normally in a season like this, we would need to feel pretty secure in who is going to be winning going into the finale, right? You have a decent idea, because the finale and really all the events that would normally take place in an hour are going to take place over 2 weeks, not just over 2 hours, but 2 separate episodes. They have a lot of time to break up that narrative and draw things out, not just in that story, but in the 3 weeks and even all the weeks before that leading up to it. So that makes me think that could even be impacting the narrative right now. And someone who we don't necessarily see as having enough steam to be the winner, they could really build up that momentum in the edit in the last couple episodes because they're getting an extra episode, not just an extra episode in the finale or an extra hour in the finale. I think it's because it's a whole extra week. I think that changes it from just being a 2-hour episode.
The other side of this is, do we start to get content fatigue? And I think that question isn't the best for us to answer because we're pretty big fans. Obviously, like we have a podcast about the entire show.
Yeah, I'm not going to get fatigued.
Yeah,
we've said we want a mini series.
It's more material for us to cover. I'm more thinking about it from the perspective of someone, like, say you're trying to get your friend to watch it with you, or you're trying to get a friend to get into Survivor. It's already daunting enough that there's 47 seasons of this show.
Yeah.
Not that you need to watch them all, but when you are trying to get your friend into it and you're like, oh, you should start watching Survivor, it's great, but you need to hit the highlights, and if you really want to watch all the seasons, I kind of liken it to trying to get someone into the MCU. There's a lot you have to do, and to understand where the game is at now, it helps knowing where the game came from.
Yeah, and I think just to butt in a little bit there before you keep going, I think it's even worse now that it's called Survivor 41, 42, 43, 47. It feels like you need to have seen what came before.
Mm-hmm.
Beforehand, when it was just Survivor brains versus bronze versus beauty, it felt like you could jump in. Survivor millennials versus Gen X, it felt like you could just jump in.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that you couldn't jump in, it was clear that this was a returnee season and it wasn't for you. You know, Survivor Winners at War isn't for a newbie. You know that going in. But a Survivor season that doesn't have a number associated with it doesn't feel like it comes with the baggage.
Yeah.
In the same way that the number directly has.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I agree with you is that it does feel a lot like the MCU, where it starts to feel that the longer it goes on, it gets harder and harder and harder to get into something. And if you get behind, it gets even more difficult.
Mm-hmm. So, like, I have friends that I would love to watch Survivor, and some of them who are like kind of casual fans. But if they wanted to watch this season, like, I know probably a lot of them wouldn't want to because they don't really want to sit through a 2-hour double episode premiere and then 90-minute episodes in between and then 2-hour finales. Like, that's a lot of television to commit yourself to watching if you're not already a fan and it's not part of your, like, weekly routine to come home on Wednesday nights and sit down at 8 o'clock and watch the show live. And I feel like watching it live feels different than, in my opinion, like watching an hour-and-a-half episode live doesn't feel as grueling of a task as sitting down to watch the 50-minute uncut adless version on TV. Like, watching it, I don't know, like, I guess it's maybe because it's part of my routine and stuff like that, but watching the 90-minute episode doesn't feel as bad as if I had to sit down and watch an hour that didn't have ads. Because, like, after the 90-minute episode is cut down without ads, it's about an hour. But if I'm presented with a 14-episode season that in total is close to probably 17, 18 hours of content, that's a lot. And it's one of the big reasons, like, I never watched Game of Thrones until now, until I started watching it with someone. That's a big ask for someone also to watch that on their own.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to turn on a TV show that has hour-long episodes in my free time unless I'm very, very committed to it.
You have to get into it. And it also have to be a TV person, and then you have to be that particular genre of TV person. And so Survivor requires you to be a reality TV person, but Survivor is also its own brand of reality TV because it was sort of the first.
Yeah, it's not like Real Housewives.
It's its own thing. And so I would say, yeah, if we're having a conversation about someone getting into it, I think that is sort of a fair conversation. But I don't know if content fatigue, to get back to your original question that you posed, is really going to impact your casual viewer that much, because I don't think someone's going to notice at the end of the day if they're getting an extra week of Survivor, right? If they're not in tune with everything, they don't know how many weeks long the season normally is versus how long this season's going to be. If they just know that, oh, Survivor's back on, cool, I'm going to watch it every week, and then it ends, and then it's over. You know, that's how I imagine casuals watch TV. I'm saying it like we're Survivor sweats and they're Survivor casuals or something. But I think that's not something that crosses someone's mind. Where I think maybe the content fatigue could come in is that we are getting a lot of the coverage that we're getting isn't particularly novel. I would say, like, we've talked about this before, I don't know that they're making the best use of the extra time.
I was about to say, if we reran this entire season and went back to hour-long episodes, would I really think that much was lost? I don't know.
I mean, well,
I guess that's certain.
It's a hard thing to say because because the length of the episode ultimately impacts the decisions they make from the beginning.
Yeah.
The challenges they choose to do. There's a good chance they decide not to do the auction if they don't have 90-minute episodes. And so I think that there's a little tug of war there. Where
But it also makes me wonder, because think pre-41. They had hour-long episodes, and every single episode they did a reward challenge, an immunity challenge, and tribal. Every single one.
And multiple days, because
they did every 3 days when someone was voted out.
Well, because not just that, but the time that they were out there was significantly longer.
Yeah, so that's
and it was the same number of episodes.
I know, and so that's what I'm saying is I think that that's a lame excuse to say that they can't do the auction because they don't have enough airtime, considering what they used to be able to do.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they can't do the auction. I'm saying that's what Jeff would say.
No, I know.
So,
and I'm saying that's stupid.
I agree. I think that if they're going to insist on, like, if they're going to have I'm not going to complain about all this extra time that we're getting, that they're giving us in terms of content. But if they're going to give us all this extra airtime, I would like for them to be showing us more camp life, which they have been, showing us more strategy, which they have been. But also, I think they should use that and let it impact the game as well, expand the game. I think we've talked about this before, but the game feels too short for people to actually develop real relationships with one another. And I think that's another thing that kind of makes it hard, is that if the game ultimately is less interesting now in the new era than it was beforehand, it doesn't matter how long you make these episodes, they're not going to be as interesting as they were before.
And sadly, I think that is the case. In my opinion, like, I still love the game. I still love Survivor. I mean, again, we have a podcast about the show.
Mm-hmm.
But as a whole, the game, in my opinion, is less interesting.
Yeah, I think a big part, and this is something I haven't told you this yet, but I want to do, after the season's over, I want to do a whole episode about the length of a Survivor season and the impact that has on relationships, because I think that there's an interesting conversation there. As I just finished Survivor Thailand, that was something, it's not a good season, but there were some really interesting things that stuck out to me as I'm like watching that at the same time as this season. And you really feel that the impact of the length on that season, where they were at their 39 days. Australia, they were at their 42 days. Compared to 27, the bonds that these people were forming there were so significant and impactful. It made every decision so incredibly crucial. It's not just about the strategy. It's not just about the food. It's not just about the surviving, but the actual relationship building was significantly more important. It's harder to just blindside someone on a whim. Whereas now, it's so easy for someone to turn on their quote-unquote alliance just like that. And it happens left and right all the time in Survivor now. And that's because they're going to Tribal every day. They're barely forming relationships. When you had 3 days between every Tribal Council, and you could go potentially the first 2 weeks without ever going to a Tribal Council. If that's the case for someone, that they could go 2 weeks and not go to a Tribal Council, almost that amount of time, it's going to be really hard to send anyone home, even if they're not in your core alliance. And so I think that's something that I would love to explore deeper in a future episode. We really need to talk about this episode. But I think that is all something that really this new era would benefit from. They don't need to necessarily go to 39 days, but we need more time for these people to actually form real relationships with one another. And I just don't think you can do that one day at a time.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to talk about regarding the logistics of a 2-part finale before we actually talk about this week's episode?
No, I think we could ramble on about that forever. So let's start talking about the episode.
Great. If you forgot, we're talking about episode 10. This week's episode starts with Genevieve immediately catching heat for last Tribal Council, which we talked last week thinking, hey, maybe
she got away with it.
Maybe she got away with it. We don't know. We ranked her pretty high in the power rankings thinking that no one found out.
That is not the case.
Joke's on us, because we didn't know that Andy told Teeny during the Tribal Scramble. And it's revealed to us right away that it spoiled, like the cat's out of the bag. It has been spoiled for her, and Genevieve is now she's buried. Right? Everyone knows that she was up to it, and it seems like I don't think she can win. She's just too big of a target at this point.
I think there's still a path for her ahead. I just don't. I think it's
you think to
tough.
The win.
I don't know. I don't think she goes next, because I think, well, it depends. If Kyle loses immunity, he's going next.
Yes.
If there's no way, we said this last time he lost, that he would go the first time he lost, and he didn't. But he's won 4. If he loses immunity and they don't vote him out, that's going to be insane. Granted, he's not like really making any strategic moves, but still,
or at least none that we're seeing.
And right now, in my opinion, her only shield is Kyle, and I think after Kyle goes, then it's a lot tougher for her. I think it would depend on if people start trying to make moves because it's getting so close to the end. Because in my opinion, taking out Genevieve isn't really that big of a move because she's an obvious threat. And I think she could be used as a smokescreen like Q was.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be to her benefit. That she could be used as, hey, I'm an obvious target. Why are you going to take out me out because I'm such an obvious target? So
I think the problem with that, though, is no one was going to vote for Q if Q was sitting in the final 3, I think
I'm sure
Genevieve could sway people to vote for her in the final 3, and I think people are would be very afraid of having to make their case against Genevieve making their case.
Yeah, I don't think
Genevieve
she's
has made big moves, and she could make a legit case. And whether you want to or not, I think if you're on the jury, it's hard to not vote for Genevieve at the end.
Yeah, I don't think she's going to win, but I'm saying that I think she doesn't. I don't think she goes next, but I don't think she wins.
I think she goes in the next 3. I think she's one of the next 3 players out of the game. I would be surprised if she's not one of the next 2. I don't think that she even makes it into the top 5. Is sort of how I have it playing out right now. If she makes it to the top 5, I think she's out at 5. I don't even think she gets a shot at fire. Is sort of my thinking. It depends on who she's there with. If there's a weird scenario where Kyle goes on a run, then it's kind of a game of he goes all the way until he doesn't win one or something.
We'll talk about this later, but I feel pretty confident about who the top 5 are going to be.
I have my power rankings, and I imagine we're probably in agreement because I think that it's like there's a clear bottom 3, and so then it's a matter of ranking the top 5 outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll get to that in a little bit. So yeah, obviously Genevieve, the blowback is teeny, and I just think the last thing I want to talk about this is that I think there was an interesting moment here where we see they talk about it a lot in Survivor about playing like purely strategically and playing emotionally. And I think that this was a really interesting moment where those 2 play styles were manifested as players in this season for us, where they likened Genevieve as the strategic player and Teeny as the emotional player, right? And they kind of contrasted the 2 of them in this moment, and they were cutting back and forth in their confessionals. And I just thought that was a really interesting moment that they had there, talking about Genevieve playing the game very strategically without emotion. And it's the emotion now is starting to seep into her game and making it harder. And then Teeny has been playing the game way more emotional than she thought she would. And now she has to start thinking more strategically. And so the 2 of them trying to take pieces of each other's game and then realizing that they're going to have to turn on one another. And I think Teeny's going to ultimately be the reason that Genevieve goes home based on that moment that we really had there together.
Mm-hmm.
And then something I noticed this episode that I hadn't thought about before. Genevieve orchestrated the blind side of Keyshawn and Saul, and her next target is Rachel. I'm just going to say, I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And I want to leave it there.
The boot order this season has been old school Survivor up and down.
Yeah, it's looking rough. It's bad. And I'm not going to say anything about Genevieve. I don't know what's going on there, but it doesn't look too good. I'm sorry. Next up, we have the challenge for reward, where they get to go to the sanctuary where good things happen.
Ugh.
And we love the sanctuary. We've talked about that before. And they do the worm, the sandworm, and they
do the worms. Ivy does the worm.
She does?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know, Ivy is Jacob's puppy. And she does the worm, apparently. But yeah, this was a really goofy challenge. I thought it was funny.
Have they done it before?
I don't know.
I thought it looked familiar. I thought I remember people having to being chained up and having to wiggle through the sand.
I have definitely, there have definitely been challenges, I know, with their hands to their waist, and I've definitely seen challenges with their feet tied before. I don't know if I've seen one with them pushing a ball over hills and dunes.
I don't remember that part.
But yeah, it was funny. They were worms moving over sand dunes, and it was very silly and goofy. There was the slow-mo moment of Andy licking the ball. That was goofy. And Sam was really good at it. He was kind of a sweat and like deep strategizing it all. And ultimately, his group wins, and they get to go to the reward where they start plotting. I don't know if there's really anything that comes out of the challenge that is of note that you want to discuss from the reward portion. Was there anything, I guess, immediately resulting from this moment that you felt was pretty significant, or from the reward where Sam, Rachel, and Kyle all got to go and eat together?
Not particularly. I don't really feel like the reward had any major impact on the game, besides the fact that I think it's pitting Rachel and Genevieve against each other.
Which
and
they've already sort of been
and
heavily put against one another, yeah.
I think that this episode as a whole is setting Rachel up to go further. This episode made me feel a lot better about Rachel's odds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rachel has slowly been building quite the edit over the last couple episodes, but it really felt like it was too little too late. And now this episode has just really stacked it in a way that it feels really like she's come on really strong here now.
Mm-hmm.
Where if we're talking about the theme of the season again, like we have before, and we're talking about it's the underdog, the underestimated, the outcast person on the bottom rising up, she fits that mold where she was left out of the Annika vote, has been living on the bottom since then, and has been backstabbed by Sam now a few times, and has just been having to bounce from alliance to alliance, but is still here and is in surprisingly a pretty good power position without being like in a noticeable power position. And so I do think she's in a very favorable spot moving into the next few episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the reward, I think, definitely showed that in her conversation with Sam. And I'm glad in this moment, the only thing that I think was pretty important was I liked that she called out Sam for immediately blowing up her spot after she asked him not to.
I mean, to be fair, Sam kind of had to.
Yeah, the chaos move.
Yeah. Because he was so obviously on the bottom. You gotta... Well, I mean, I guess not so obviously because he wasn't going home.
It wasn't him. That's the thing, is that he wasn't the one going home. And so all he did was burn his only bridge that he actually had. And so that's where he said he just created chaos that ultimately resulted in Saul going home. Whereas if he hadn't done that, I don't know if Saul would have gone home.
I still think he would have gone home.
It wouldn't have been as nice and neat.
No, yeah, I don't. But I think, honestly, it might have been better because then it created more... It was probably better for some people because then everyone was on the same page.
Yes, I don't think it was better for Sam's game, is what I will say. I think that it ultimately... Like, it's way better for Teeny's game that he blew it up, right? I don't know if it was better for his game, though, in making that decision. It remains to be seen. We'll have to see how far he goes. Mm-hmm. If he makes it to Final Tribal and gets votes, then who knows? Maybe it was a good move. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
Beyond that, then we have the immunity challenge.
And the rice negotiation.
Yes.
Which that I think
kind
we'll
of all
probably
happen together.
Spend some time talking about the rice negotiation.
Yeah. It really is a very important part of every season of the new era. Have they had it every season since 41? Or did they implement it after that? I don't remember.
I can't remember.
But it's been a staple for a while now.
Mm.
If it hasn't been there since 41. Because I can't remember if it was in that season or not.
Personally, I thought going into the rights negotiation, there was no way they were going to get it. I thought that there was no one really felt that secure. And I think that, like, for instance, I knew Kyle was for sure not going to. Gabe for sure no. Sue for sure no. Sam for sure no. Andy probably no. And and you need 4. So that's 5 out of 9. And then I think Teeny would maybe. Genevieve, I don't think would. I think the only people who would have sat out would have been Caroline, maybe Teeny, maybe Genevieve.
I think Sue should have.
I think she should have.
She has an idol.
But she wouldn't have.
Like, she did good, and she probably could have won. Obviously, she came very close to winning. But you have an idol. I don't know why, if you really need the rice, I don't know why she wouldn't have volunteered herself up. Because nobody's going to suspect you're doing that because you have an idol. They're just going to suspect you're doing it because you're Sue. You're the older lady that's left, right? But I wasn't surprised that they couldn't get 4 out of 5 or 4 out of 9 to step down. What was interesting to me was what ultimately resulted. And really, what was surprising to me was that Jeff accepted the offer. I think, based on our conversation earlier, you were surprised that they offered up their shot in the darks at all. Is that right?
No, I wasn't. I'm not. I think what surprised me is he thought of doing that. Because if I was sitting there trying to negotiate, I wouldn't have thought, oh, let's offer our shots in the dark. Like that just wouldn't have crossed my mind. So that's what was shocking to me about it, was that they thought of that to auction off. And I thought that was very inventive, creative, I guess. So
yeah.
That's what shocked me. But what I was shocked that Jeff said yes. I meant to listen to On Fire because I'm sure they talked about it. I don't know why I didn't listen. I don't know why I didn't listen to On Fire while I was at work today. I just didn't get around to it.
Yeah, I thought you would have already listened to that coming into this. For context, I just finished watching the episode, and Jacob watched it live, which at the time of recording this was 24 hours ago.
Yeah. So I don't know why I didn't watch it or listen to On Fire, but I didn't. But anyways, in the episode, Jeff, like when I don't remember when he said it, but he was basically saying that he thinks that he got like a way better end of the bargain, in the sense that their shots in the dark were way more valuable than the rice that he gave them.
Yeah, Jeff, because I wrote down some notes. He was talking about the shot in the dark as it is being someone's, it's like their last chance, right? Their Hail Mary, whatever. But it's only worked once. I don't even see it as being a real chance, but Jeff definitely viewed it as he walked away winning the negotiation. He walked away with the better part.
And I think that's where the disconnect between Jeff and the Survivor players and Survivor fan base is. Because it's very obvious that the players do not look at the shot in the dark that valuable.
Well, so here's the thing. So I did write this down. I agree with you. I wrote that. But I think in the moment, Jeff thought that their negotiation was based on how much they valued rice, not how much they devalued the shot in the dark.
Yeah.
But I think it was a combination of the two, in that one, yes, they they valued the rice a lot, but also most of them, I don't think take the shot in the dark seriously at all. And so it felt like they weren't really, like, it didn't feel like they were actually giving up anything, because it's not like giving up your vote, right? Where you're actually giving up power. You're giving up something that would cause you to give up your vote for a 1 in 6 shot at being safe. That has only ever worked once in the history of the new era. And so it's just, I think that the shot in the dark is something that no one respects. It literally is a Hail Mary, but it's like a Hail Mary that's being thrown by the punter, not by Aaron Rodgers, who is notoriously good at throwing Hail Marys.
And it's also the fact that the only time it did work, they got voted out the very next day.
Yeah, it buys you safety once, and if you were the target that week, you're the target next week. It's not even a move that you can claim as being strategic, like an
luck.
idol.
It's all
completely luck based. So it's not even a move that you can use to your advantage at the end.
Yeah, because
even if you made it past that point and made it all the way to the end, you can't say, I played my shot in the dark. No, duh, you played your shot in the dark.
You're gonna go home.
That is the problem. If it was 2 people give up their vote, or someone give up a hidden immunity idol, or something like that is consequential, that feels significant. But I just think the shot in the dark is such an unserious mechanic of the game that it just doesn't matter. And it just is so clear, and in this moment felt more clear than ever, that Jeff doesn't see it that way, and Survivor production doesn't see it that way. They view it as being incredibly consequential and powerful. I really hope that this move, and them then seeing the way maybe that viewers responded to it and the way the season plays out, hopefully, maybe this season, the way Rachel did her shot in the dark and this shot in the dark negotiation, maybe they realize, okay, shot in the dark, not the mechanic. And we need to rework it if we want another wrench out there other than idols.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just don't, it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And I personally think that their motivation for the shot in the dark isn't necessarily to give every single player like a last resort. In my opinion, the shot in the dark serves more for people having to pull off bigger blindsides, because now every single person has a shot at safety. Whereas before, the only thing you really had to worry about was if someone had a hidden immunity idol.
Yeah.
And then you just split votes. And now in the new era, you don't really split votes all that often. You just dogpile on someone, and if they play their shot in the dark, they either go home or you just revote and vote someone else out. And so, in my opinion, I feel like they added the shot in the dark to try and influence strategy and increase the strategic prowess of players and make it where players have to be more crafty in their blind sides.
I agree.
But then
I think so too.
But in doing that, I just feel like it feeds into this resume building stuff that we have talked about that we don't like.
I think that I agree. I think that they implemented it for a reason like that. That might not have been the only reason, but I think that probably was partial reasoning. And at the very least, that is the result that we have from it, where now every single vote has to be a blindside. It has to be. The person who's going home cannot know that they're going home. They just never can. You haven't finished Thailand yet, right?
Mm-mm.
I'm not going to spoil it, but I think to make the point here, I think that it's worth bringing up. And obviously this was before there were hidden immunity idols, so it's a little bit different. But there's a point in this season where the tribe sits down and they have a conversation before tribal and talk about who's going to go home that night, because they know someone's going to go home, and they're like, well, what's the point in like revealing it there, right? Like, why don't we just be open and honest about it right now and talk about it? And so obviously that changes later once the hidden immunity idol's introduced, which is why they introduced the hidden immunity idol, because that was really boring. And so it throws a wrench into it. But you can't ever have a moment of people contemplating themselves going home or living like going into a tribal and it being a little bit risky. You go in and you are never going to know that you're the one going home, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it goes, which, I mean, it leads to epic blindsides for TV, but when every vote's a blindside, it feels like none of them are.
Yeah.
It's like Incredibles. When everyone's super, no one is.
Be.
So, I agree. I just think the shot in the dark, maybe we should do some deep research on the shot in the dark and pull up some stats and stuff. We can do a whole episode on it and maybe come up with some better solutions for Jeff and send in a petition to the On Fire podcast like every week.
Just bug Jay.
Yep, until he at least shows it to Jeff. They won't read it, but at least show it to Jeff. After they do the rice negotiation, though, because no one had to step out, everyone gets to participate. And ultimately, Kyle ends victorious. 4th win in a row. He's one away. Or not in a row, but 4th win. I don't think it's in a row.
Yeah. It's the first time someone has won 4 times in the new era.
Yes. And if he wins 5, he joins
the elite.
The group of
like Ozzy,
players.
Colby.
Yeah. So it's the people who have won the most is 5. No one's ever won 6. And so the players who have won 5, it's Colby, Tom Westman, Terry, Ozzy, Mike Holloway, and Brad Culpepper. Like those are the...
Did Joe not win 5? I thought he did.
No, because it's 6 players have won 5.
Mm.
And then only one has won 5 in a row, and that was Colby.
Mm-hmm.
And then only 2 have won 5 and then went on to win their seasons. But I don't think you know either of them win their seasons, so I'm not going to mention who they are. But I think that if he's able to win another immunity, that's legendary. That's crazy. And it's also what's crazier to me is how terrible his edit feels like it's been for him to be so dominant at all this stuff. Like I still know nothing about Kyle except he doesn't eat meat and he loves his family. That's all I know about Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I knew so much about Colby. Obviously, he went and made it to the end. He didn't win, but he made it really far and was like an all-star, so it's a little different. And Ozzy was an epic player, but I knew a lot about them. And Brad, like, it's hard because they were like really, maybe Kyle's just not that interesting. I hate to say that. So maybe that's the issue. I don't know. But it just feels like for someone to be so dominant at challenges, for us to not get more of them feels super weird.
No, I agree. He doesn't have any alliances either, at least from what we can tell. Like he had that moment with
Gabe was his alliance. They didn't want to vote for each other, but they knew they had to.
Yeah.
That was his only alliance.
So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it feels very weird. But yeah, he wins. Sue, pretty badass. She almost wins again, which was pretty lit. Like, she doing surprisingly well. I think showing everyone that she's stronger than everyone thinks, which could make her into an easier target for someone if they're like looking to take out another Tuku, even if Kyle is, has immunity. Say he wins a 5th one, and they're like, oh, well, we need a Tuku. I think Caroline could pretty easily flip it on Sue, and Caroline knows that Sue has an idol, and she's the only one that knows Sue has an idol, and so she could tell everyone, hey, Sue has an idol. We blindside her.
Mm-hmm.
Get her out of here. I think it makes it very easy to flip it on Sue and get Sue out pretty quick if she decides that she doesn't want to play with her anymore. Anything else from this challenge that you think is worth discussing, or about the rice exchange?
Not really. I want to talk about Gabe getting out.
Yeah. So now I think we just go to Tribal Council, and maybe if there's any of the lead up to it. But yeah, I guess how do you feel about how Tribal Council went down? We knew that it was going to be Genevieve or Gabe. Gabe and Genevieve knew it was going to be one of them two, which is interesting because that's rare to happen. But because no one has their shot in the dark, that's able to be the case now.
I like how we have devolved.
It's beautiful.
We have somehow devolved back to what Survivor was. We didn't really have we had mergatory because Jeff doesn't want to call it a merge tribe, but essentially we had a normal merge for the most part. We had
kind of.
We had about as normal of a merge as we're going to get, most likely.
Yes.
We had everyone voted, everyone cast one vote, everyone got to vote, and there was no shot in the dark. It was crazy. It was normal. It was beautiful.
Oh yeah, tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the thing. The second the rice negotiation, when they suggested every shot in the dark, I started just pray. I was please say yes, Jeff. Because I knew if they gave up their shot in the dark, I was like, this is going to make the game so amazing. Because we're going to get to see new era Survivor without the shot in the dark for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And so this legitimately is going to give Jeff a case study, a real world example of what Survivor looks like without the shot in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And so if this is really compelling and interesting gameplay, I think that the shot in the dark becomes indefensible. You can't say that it makes the game more interesting if the game is just as interesting, if not more, without it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I almost think that it's more. I think it's more interesting without it.
I agree.
I don't see. We're gonna get back on that track, but still,
I loved seeing the interaction of Gabe and Genevieve talking to each other. Well, it's gonna be one of us. I loved that. And
funny.
And that wouldn't happen if it needed to be a blindside.
Yeah. Or if they had shot in the darks, because they would probably both be playing their shot in the dark, and neither of them would be casting a vote. And odds that one of them hits it, I mean, I guess it's still 1 in 6, right? Yeah, I think that it is way better that the shot in the dark's not in the game now. And the fact that we're at Final 8 and we're going to be able to see 5 people leave the game now, not having the shot in the dark in their pocket.
It's going to be so epic.
It's going to be different from anything we've seen in the rest of the new era.
I'm so excited to see how it impacts the game.
Yeah. And I think that this will allow us to, if the Survivor community can rally behind the gameplay moves that happen over these next few episodes, if they're good and they're compelling, with there not being a shot in the dark, and really make their voice heard, I think that there's a chance that the shot in the dark can go away in season 49 or 50. And we talked about this last week, how it feels like it's a mechanic that is due for a rework in 49 or 50 anyways. And I would really, really like for this, now it feels like even more of a catalyst for there to be some sort of a change in the game. How do you feel about Gabe being the one that was ultimately decided to go home over Genevieve?
I don't necessarily know that Gabe was a bigger threat than Genevieve, if I'm being completely honest.
I don't think so either.
And everyone's saying that, oh, if we're sitting next to Gabe at the end, he's winning. Where are they getting that from? I don't think Gabe was a bigger threat than Genevieve, if I'm being completely honest. They were saying that if they're sitting next to Gabe at the end, Gabe wins. I don't really see that.
I will say, in their defense, 5 of them are voting for the winner. They are making up the majority of the jury. And so, if they as a whole think that Gabe is winning, that means that they as a whole think that Gabe should win. Like how Genevieve said, I like how she said it really candidly. When they were talking about Kyle, she said, if he's sitting at the end and I'm on the jury, I will vote for him. She said that straight up. And I think that maybe they feel that way about Gabe, is just that. And I think it's probably anyone outside of Tuku, probably, it's their impression of Gabe that he sort of run Tuku. And then the idea is that any Tuku who is on the jury would vote for Gabe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I imagine it's probably the combination of those things. But I think from the outside, we feel like Gabe hasn't played the winningest game, but we're also being fed an edit where Gabe isn't the winner. And so I think that it's hard to see what they're seeing. But on the island, up to this point, if it felt like Gabe was the strongest player, I don't think we can deny that, because they're literally the ones who would be voting for him in the end. So it's hard for us to see, and so I can acknowledge that it's very hard for us to see that, but I also can see where they would be coming from in this.
Mm-hmm.
But from a purely outside looking in, I do think Genevieve appears to be the much bigger threat.
Yeah.
Based on the edit that we're being fed. Which makes sense because she makes it further than Gabe. I don't think she makes it into the top 5. That's going to be my prediction. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Is there anyone else from this episode that stands out to you? We already talked a bit about Rachel, but I didn't know if there's anyone else.
I will say I felt like Andy took a little bit more of a backseat this episode than he did in previous ones. I mean, I think he was still a very prevalent player in terms of his confessionals, but I think
he drove the first half of the episode, and then he took a backseat.
Why do they keep showing him doing these things in challenges? This is
licking the ball
and like biting it, and like the close up of like his tongue with sand in his mouth. I'm like, what are we doing?
I don't know, man. The camera person went off. You got to put that shot in. I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. It was disgusting, but it was hilarious.
Yeah, it was nasty.
Andy had some interesting stuff. Like I said, I think the beginning of the episode had a lot more Andy driving it. He had the whole moment where he described himself as the smiling assassin, and they were doing this cut back and forth between the spider on the web, like approaching and eating things that it was catching, and then they were cutting to players and showing their faces. And I didn't make a note of who the players were, but I was like, that'd be hilarious if this is like foreshadowing who's going to go in the next couple episodes. But one of them was Genevieve, so keep your eye on that.
Crazy.
So that was an interesting moment, and then he highlights his alliance with Sam and his alliance with Rachel, and then he's trying to build an alliance with Kyle, and he's just in a position where he's able to form a lot of relationships. And so it really does feel like Andy has somehow put himself in this position where he's come from literally being on the ground in the first episode, as low as you can be in Survivor, should have been voted out, to now he's in a position where he has formed a relationship with every player still in the game. And at the end, he forms one with Sue. And I think he's the most well-connected person in the Merge tribe, where he knows every plan that's going on, and then he can just pick and choose where his vote's going to go. And he's been on the right side of those votes. And so I think that puts him in a really good spot. But after that beginning sort of montage, aside from the moment with him and Rachel, where they had some more conversation where she had to acknowledge that, okay, she has to go back to him for a ally, I don't think that there was a whole lot of him driving the story like there has been in previous episodes, aside from him naming the episode again.
For the 4th time.
Yes. Loyal to the soil.
I thought that was a dumb expression.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really get it, but
I didn't get it either.
I don't know why they chose that as the title.
It doesn't really have any bearing on the episode.
I think they just liked that it
rhymed.
Yeah. I just think they liked how it sounded.
Okay.
So the one person that I think really got a lot of screen time that desperately needed it for their edit to be a contender moving forward is Teeny. Teeny had a really significant moment there in the middle that was, I think, like absolutely incredible if you're wanting to gauge it as moving the needle towards a winner edit, where we got everything from like the slow sort of sad kind of music in the background, where we have emotional catharsis and talking about off island and on island life and how they're merging, and it ties that whole sort of very long extended confessional tied directly into the season's theme of being an outcast and being an underdog, being underestimated. And then Teenie specifically says the line at the end about the moment, like, of their bag, like, literally lighting on fire, like snapping them out of this fog as lighting a new fire underneath them and reinvigorating them to move forward in this game. And that is a moment that was very intentionally put in here by the editors, and it feels significant. And that's the sort of thing that they put in for someone who's going to make it to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happened, I was like, all right, I feel justified putting Teenie in the final three. I just don't see a world right now where Teenie's not in the final three. I already was feeling that way, but I was bouncing back and forth because some episodes would be really strong, some would be a little bit weaker, but Teenie's kind of just like always been there. And right now, Teenie's writing this perfect underdog narrative. And I think that this is setting them up for success moving into the finale.
Yeah. After this episode, I for sure think Teenie is in the final three. 100%.
Great. I think we can move right into power rankings then, since
Okay.
we're already right there. Can you guess the three that I have missing?
Kyle?
Yep.
Genevieve?
Yep.
Sue?
Yep. Beautiful. So I don't have them in any particular order. I didn't rank through 8 because obviously we don't know what order they're going to go. It's very dependent on if Kyle wins immunity or not.
Mm.
I assume that it's between Kyle and Genevieve at 7 and 8. But if word of Sue's idol gets out, that could totally throw a wrench into everything. At 5, I have Caroline. I think that Caroline's edit has weakened a lot.
I agree.
I think that it came on a little bit stronger here at the end, but in this episode, it was everyone had really strong confessional counts, and then Caroline and Sue had 3 confessionals, Kyle had 2. The 3 of them were just there. And then Gabe had 8, right? The most for Tuku was going home. And then Teenie had 7, and Genevieve had 9, Sam had 6, and Rachel had 6, and Andy had 5. These people are getting a lot of screen time. And it just feels like Caroline and Sue they're just not really getting it right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a little while, it felt like maybe that was going to be an underdog narrative where Caroline, she was just going to fly under the radar. But now it just sort of feels like she's just kind of and not going to be relevant in the end. And so we were hopeful for her, but I feel like she's at 5. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I think that she's the bottom of the top 5.
I feel very certain. I think Agata is winning.
I wouldn't be so confident that Agata is winning. I am pretty confident a Tuku is not winning.
Yeah, I do think that.
That is a statement that I am willing to say. I do not think a Tuku is going to win this game. I think that it is going to be Agata or Teenie, because Teenie got a lot of screen time with Rome. And so I still think that even though, yes, Gata has had a lot of the edit, I think that Teenie was consistently getting the edit as well because of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think Teenie is the non-Gata who could get it. So I think it's like, those are obviously our top 4, right? 3 Gata and Teenie.
Mm-hmm.
So I have...
Could you imagine and all got a final 3?
I cannot imagine that. I don't think they're going to allow that to happen, which is why I think that there's actually a world where one of them goes out before 5, right?
Yeah, I think that's possible.
I think that's totally feasible. I think Sam potentially could. I think that's totally reasonable, just because soon that they'll be in the majority, and that will worry people, right? And then that becomes problematic. So, but I do have Sam at 4, just because his edit isn't as strong.
But it's weird because you saying Sam at 4 means that Sam loses in fire.
Yeah, technically, I think he would probably go out at 5, right? If we were just saying the order they're going out. I did the same thing last week where I put Sam at 4 and Teeny at 5, but I said technically I think Sam would be voted out at 5 and not lose at fire. But I think for the sake of these rankings, I think Sam is closer to getting into the final 3 than Caroline is, if that makes sense. If we wanted to make it really realistic and think it through, I'd say, man, maybe Sue makes it to final 5, right? And then Sue goes out in fire after Caroline goes out at 5, or something like that, right? That could be realistic, where it goes Kyle, Genevieve, Sam. That seems like a realistic thing, but I think Sam has a better chance at getting into 3, which is why I'm putting him in the top 5, because it's still power ranking. So I have Sam at 4, Rachel at 3, Teeny at 2, Andy at 1.
Yeah, my final 3 was Andy, Rachel, Teeny after watching this episode.
I only have Teeny above Rachel because I just think Teeny has been strong for the whole season. Rachel has come
been
on
more recent.
Rachel has come on really, really strong starting episode 7. Came on strong 6, but really picked it up on 7.
Mm-hmm.
And Teeny has been consistent all season. And so, but what's interesting is they're averaging the exact same number of confessionals, if you care about the confessional count.
Teeny and Rachel?
Yeah. 4.5 an episode. Even though Rachel's is significantly more volatile and Teeny's is a lot more consistent. It's interesting. I just think Teeny is stronger season-wide, like season-long, and they're wanting to tell a season-long story. Andy just feels like the obvious winner pick. But again, it feels too obvious, which is what makes it scary. Because I just don't know is the winner going to be this. It feels like the most obvious winner of the new era. Like it feels like it would be, I can't think of a more obvious winner since Russell and Samoa.
And he didn't even win.
That's what I'm saying. Like it was like someone who was guaranteed to win and then didn't. So that's sort of what this feels like. Someone is just driving the season. He is the winner of the season. He's going the whole way. He is the whole season. Everyone thinks he's going to win. And then at the end, he doesn't win.
He's been the main character of literally every single episode.
Yeah. So that's where I think there's a very good chance he falls flat at the end. Maybe he just doesn't get votes. Because maybe. I don't know. There was that whole... He got the Entertainment Weekly interview. If we want to think outside the game, would they give that to the winner?
But would Entertainment Weekly know the winner?
It doesn't matter. Survivor picks the player that they interview.
Entertainment Weekly doesn't pick?
No. Survivor, they get to interview one player, and Survivor tells them...
CBS tells them who they're going to interview?
CBS Press, they set up the interview. They're like, all right, you can interview this player, and then they clear the questions to be interviewed about for that mid-season interview.
Interesting.
So they were okay with the interview being Andy. Would they be okay with them interviewing the winner for the first time?
Maybe it's to throw us off.
Maybe. I don't know. It is interesting, but I think he's the clear number 1 right now, regardless.
I agree. Well, that will wrap up our recap and review of episode 10, Boil to the Soil. If you enjoyed this episode, we would really appreciate a rating/review as it helps our podcast grow. You can check us out on social media on Twitter/X, Instagram, TikTok, at Idle Talk Podcast. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.